Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, while Brexit has very much dominated the UK election campaign, 18 female MPs have also said they will not be restanding due to a toxic political atmosphere fuelled by online harassment. We'll be talking to Professor Kalina Bontcheva, who's closely tracking the abuse that British politicians, especially women, are currently facing online. Also, how a 2-month-long strike by Zimbabwe's doctors and nurses is forcing desperate women to seek out traditional midwives who often deliver babies with no sterilisation or post-natal care. And the first space movie that goes to where nobody has gone before. Yes, the cinematic tale of a single mother who also happens to be an astronaut. But first, and while the upcoming UK elections have been overwhelmed by talk of Brexit, there's another issue causing concern. 18 women MPs have announced that they will not be standing again in the December 12th election. They have cited abuse, threats and a culture of intimidation as being significant factors for stepping down, not helped by the toxic political climate surrounding Brexit. The departure also triggering memories of Jo Cox, the Labor MP, who was murdered by a right-wing extremist just before the Brexit referendum in 2016. Joining me now is Professor Kalina Bontcheva, a computer scientist from Sheffield University in the UK. She's also conducting a large-scale study tracking the abuse that UK MPs, both women and men, have been receiving on Twitter since 2016, and that work has been extended now globally via a new study of abuse being received by female journalists, political and human rights activists that's been supported by the International Centre for Journalists. Professor Bontcheva, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you for inviting me.
When it comes to online harassment of women MPs, what has your study revealed so far?
The study has revealed a very staggering increase in abuse that female MPs have been receiving. If we take one example of Jo Swinson, who is the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, at the beginning of this year, she wasn't targeted so much by online abuse, but by September, when she started spearheading the Remain campaign, she became, her levels of abuse on Twitter increased 200-fold. And she started also being targeted by disinformation for example, she was alleged that she's having financial links to EU funding for millions of euros, and there was some other disinformation spread around her.
Just how much difference, though, is there in the type of abuse and harassment received by women as opposed to men?
So, although men do receive a lot of political abuse, the abuse that women receive is very different. It's primarily sexist abuse, also death threats and rape threats, as well as other, sometimes also racial abuse. So it is the kind of abuse that really has a lot of significant impact on them, and often it's combined with abuse over email. So overall, it is very serious intimidation.
But what impact is this going to have on democracy as such when you have a large, sizable chunk of your population who is being harassed online every time they take a public stance or indeed, you know, take on a public position?
It will have a very negative stance on democracy, and I believe that there need to be steps taken in order to reduce the amount of abuse that female politicians and others in high-profile positions are experiencing online. And to a large degree, there needs to be a way in which the public debate becomes more tolerant and more accepting towards different viewpoints.
So what steps need to be taken?
So, of course, for the more serious types of threats, there are legal steps that, and laws that can be put in place. But in addition to that, a major problem which seems to, spark a lot of the online abuse is the actual way in which media and politicians themselves discuss the views of opponents. So, for example, some opponents were called mutineers in relation to Brexit, which is a very strong term, and that did really result into a big spike in the online abuse that these politicians received. And then, likewise, the Prime Minister has referred to Muslim women as letterboxers in relation to the wear that they have. And that also had serious impact on anti-Muslim hate crime. And so overall, I think there needs to be also improvement in the way media and politicians address language and address their opposition, and be mindful of the impact and the fact that, in a way, the way they speak normalizes abuse in some ways and prompts very strong responses.
Professor Bontcheva, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the first woman to head the European Commission is taking over the job. Former German Defence Minister Ursula von der Leyen will replace Jean-Claude Juncker at the helm of the Commission that will lead the next stage of Brexit talks with the UK. And in another historic first, her 27-strong team for the new Commission also includes 13 women. Now, with Zimbabwe reeling from its worst economic crisis in more than a decade, the country's doctors, nurses and midwives are out on strike. It's left public hospitals closed and many pregnant women fending for themselves. Cole Stangler has more.
Just outside Zimbabwe's capital, this apartment is doubling as a maternity ward. A 2-month-long strike from doctors and nurses has left many hospitals empty or closed, forcing pregnant women who can't afford private care to desperately seek alternatives. It's turned this grandmother with no formal training into a local hero. She says she's delivered more than 100 babies.
There has never been any incident where a pregnant woman comes here and fails to receive assistance or has had a child die. This is because God is helping with this process.
18-year-old Perseverance says it's a miracle all went well.
Yes, I was worried. I didn't know what to do, but when I found the girl who told us to come here, I was relieved. Then I gave birth to my baby.
As the country faces its worst economic crisis in more than a decade, doctors in public hospitals have been on strike since September. They've rejected a government offer that would raise pay to the equivalent of €118 a month. But with no sterilization or postnatal care in place, the situation is a public health nightmare.
I didn't realize that the situation was that bad, especially given the area that we are in. And from what I hear, there have been some good outcomes from this setup. But there are issues. I mean, this is just the environment itself.
Zimbabwe's health sector was once considered one of the best in the continent. And as it stands, the country has a maternal mortality ratio of 460 for every 100,000 births, just below the average of sub-Saharan Africa. Unions representing hospital staff say things are moving backwards today.
And a new film called Proxima has just opened in French cinemas, starring Eva Green, not as the astronaut's worried wife or girlfriend, but in fact as the astronaut herself. She sat down to talk about the film with Claudie Agnuret, the first French woman in space. Camille Nedelec reports.
5, 4, 3.
It's not a game, it's a countdown to their separation. Sarah is an astronaut and she's going to space.
Aye, Captain.
It's a childhood dream that forces Sarah to leave her child behind.
I'd be saying,
Tu savais que ta maman allait partir un jour? Ça te fait très peur, un peu peur. Un peu peur.
Sarah also faces months of intense physical training to prepare her for life in space. Just how intense, Claudie Agnuret knows full well. She was the first female French astronaut who went to space in 1996.
A few years ago, the female spacesuit wasn't designed with the female body in mind. It was hard to wear.
When we had lunch, I was struck by how strong Claudie's arms are. Non, c'est assez étonnant.
It's true, I remember that comment.
Détraction, détraction. Mais c'est vrai que
As women, we don't want special
pas
treatment.
envie de traitement de faveur.
Mais je pense qu'aujourd'hui, on a les moyens technologiques
I think today we have the technology to enable women to succeed
de réussir sans
without having to transcend their own bodies.
dépasser des limites physiologiques.
It's a crucial change of mindset that is still only just catching on. In April, NASA had to cancel the first entirely female spacewalk because there weren't enough spacesuits in the right size. It eventually went ahead in October. But female astronauts are still the exception to the rule.
There was one girl for every 6 students in my class, and of those, 15% applied to be astronauts. The glass ceiling starts early.
To inspire young girls, the European Space Agency worked with a toy manufacturer to develop an astronaut doll.
I think there's still many girls who say that's not for me when they see a lack of role models.
Proxima is far from a cliched space film. It's centred on the story of a female astronaut and her daughter that could inspire other little girls.
And that's it for now. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. So until our next show, bye for now.